Oh, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. My name is Dan Shaheen. It's been a while since I've been back here in a traditional interview setting, but I promise to be back more. This week, I've got a great guest. We've seen him here before, and I've got a few more repeat guests lined up for the coming weeks. Next week, we'll have Tom Scioli. He's going to come in. He came in before to talk about his Jack Kirby book. He's coming in this time to talk about his Stan Lee book, and that should be fun. Because this is the channel. This is the place where we do our best to think really hard about comics. We try to bring in only the most thoughtful individuals and creators, and that's why today I'm happy to welcome back into the studio. Man, he's got a lot to say. He's an incredibly talented artist. Let's bring back in Dandy Dr. Don Simpson. Hey, Don.
Hey, Dan. Who's your guest you're talking about? Sounds very interesting. I wish I was watching that.
That's you, Dr. Dandy Don. You're a doctor, right? You're a PhD.
Here I am drawing. You caught me completely unawares. Your spy cam has found me drawing more Megaton Man comics. And I just finished a page. Let me show you. In beautiful black and white, Indian ink, hand lettering. I want you to know that it's hand lettered.
Expect nothing less, Don.
And white out, and a few Avery label corrections in a few places, just like they did back in the day in the 20th century. Here's a splash page, and everything you're seeing here. I've been going gangbusters this week. I finished a project over the weekend, and I've been chomping at the bit to come back and do some more Megaton Man. Here's the Megaton Mice and Cosmic Cat, and there will be Megaton Man in the story, although he's got a populated universe full of characters that I'm very anxious to get to. So, what do you want to talk about?
Well, we can start there because the Megaton universe, the Simpson verse, as we call it, the Don Simpson extended universe, as it's formally known, has been blowing up and expanding lately by incorporating public domain and quasi public characters who maybe have been swimming around out there and we've been waiting for a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your current work, just in general, where that's coming from?
Well, okay, so the project I finished
now, it's all Dawn all the time now.
Project I finished this weekend. We started this. This was a more or less a pandemic project that we started. You know what those are like, Dan. This was Victory Folks #1, and I was penciling it, and Jason Moore is the inker here. And we got Bill Lobes to write the script, and we even had Tom Orzechowski do the lettering digitally.
Quite a pedigree on that team.
This came out early '92. It's the flip cover of Yeet Presents #50, which is a long-running anthology up in Michigan. Cost of Paper Comics. So we did this, and I explained the whole origin of this project and how it came about. But it's basically public domain characters, and I thought I would throw them all together. Characters like Daredevil, Crime Buster, And let me show you some of the other artwork.
I saw a lot of public domain inspired projects spring out of the pandemic for sure. This was
Well,
one.
I thought I was being original by copying, but of course, Eric Larson and other people have been doing it for quite a while. This was the final page. So to make a long story short, I started with all those creators that I just named, but I had to finish it up myself because they all got busy doing real paying projects. So it's now a 32-page story. I went back and relettered the first 10 pages, and I'm going to put out a black and white one shot for the summer. And so I was quite excited just to finish it. They have a cameo appearance in X amount of comics, which we can talk about. Here they are as little kids. They regress to childhood. We're talking about how difficult it is to draw babies.
Right. Yeah. 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 Well, I love that's the little victory folks, right? That's fantastic. We love that. That's merchandising aplenty. You can put jammies out and stuff with the victory folks. What one thing I've always thought is like these public domain projects, a lot of them come at it from the idea of like I'm gonna create a universe using these characters and put my spin on it and put them in one big connected universe. Where I would really love to see a book that is just an ongoing anthology that uses the public domain characters, but then just has small short stories or whatever in it by top-notch comics artists and writers. Like I just think that would be an amazing book.
Well, in the one shot that I'm going to have at shows this summer, a couple shows, I have a text piece in the back where I talk about the origin of the project over the pandemic and how I came to finish it myself after everybody else got busy. But I also talk about the kind of the appeal. First of all, the appeal of Golden Age characters is that number one, you don't have to listen to anybody. You don't have to listen to editors or publishers, and you don't have half a century of continuity to worry about. You have a total free hand, so that's a fun thing about it. But also, they haven't really been touched since those golden years. They haven't been modernized, and it really it can give you the excuse me, it gives you the feeling that you're, you know, in that generation of Batman and Superman, the earliest of comics, and that you're actually there at the creation. You're dealing with these primal, rather crude and elementary materials, but you get to revamp them and modernize them. I haven't paid too much attention to what anybody else has been doing. I really don't care. I just kind of, like I said, I wasn't even aware that Eric Larson had been doing it.
Well, I also know we had Michael Finn, lawyer to the comic book superstars and public domain legal expert, and he did a book with Mark Waid called Liberty Brigade, and we had them in here, and they talked about that using a lot of these same characters. He had a special affection for all the patriotic, all the different Captain America knockoffs, right? So
right,
they're all in there. But again, it took the approach of sort of trying to tie all those characters into one universe, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, and that's really part of what you're doing in your comics, in X amount of comics and others, which I want to talk about next. I really want to talk about the most confusingly named project maybe in comics history. Can you tell me?
Well, it's not only confusing for the readers, but it got completely screwed up when it went out to Amazon, and
Yes.
even on the Fantagraphics listing, they're calling it the 1969 annual.
I think
So
they
it's
fixed I
hopeless.
think they fixed that, by the
It's
way.
hopelessly well. I think it's still on the Amazon UK. It still says 1969. But
Well,
if you
so
look for, it's called, the official title is X amount of comics, colon, 1963, parentheses, uh, when else, one word, WHENELSE, capital W, capital E, question mark,
Interrobang.
question mark, exclamation point, close parentheses, annual. So it's the X amount of comics, 1963, when else annual.
But you
And
forgot a couple, Don. You forgot a couple though, because what about Megaton Man in Pictopia, Dandy Don's X
well,
amount of comics,
yeah,
1963 WhenElse annual.
that's just the blurb from, yeah, that's just the blurb from the cover. That's not.
It's on there.
If you look up, if you look up Simpson Annual, you'll get a bunch of Matt Groening comics.
All right. No, well,
So,
I got X amount of comics because
yep.
quantity over quality. Just explain to me what does X amount of comics mean? Like I knew what 1963 annual is.
No, I came across. I wish I pulled it out of the archives, but
And and
I
and correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, Don, but correct me if I'm wrong. When else is a reference to John Burns' else when
right,
stuff, right? So
right.
explain to me the whole thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Let us know, where did this title come from and what does it mean?
Well, I didn't want to just call it the 1963 annual, although I could have done that legally, but I didn't want to be that blatant, so I buried it under all this verbiage, which is probably going to work against it as a sales tool. But
Is that
I came across.
a legal gambit to say, like, I'm not trying to infringe on the titles at all? Like, here, this is totally something else. There's no mistaking this for what might be copyrighted by
No,
someone,
well, as I understand it, you can't trademark a year, first
right?
of all.
Yes.
And if they had trademarked anything, they would have abandoned it because they never finished it. So, but it's just, it's kind of to stave off some level of criticism, which I'm sure I'm going to get anyway. So that doesn't matter. But to me, it's just a value add to have just a funny, overly wordy title.
Okay. Fair
Um,
enough.
but the funny thing was that I came across in my files not very long ago in storage. I have a sketch of X amount of comics, which was a title that I had in mind for maybe kind of more of an underground apocalyptic kind of project. It wasn't really tied to anything. So I've kind of repurposed that title.
Because I felt like, Don, this is like one of those titles that was like people who wanted to put out something like that that was sort of X-Men feeling or related without infringing. I mean, come on, you even have you even have the little jaggy edges on the edges of the X, Don. You don't
Right.
think we're
Yeah.
catching that? We're onto that here.
And that was in this little sketch that I had produced years ago, probably from the late 90s. So I've been toying around with that title for a while. I think we might have talked the last time how that it was kind of an improvisation. I did that cover, which I think you have queued up, the Fuck Al cover,
Oh,
which
right.
got a lot of notoriety. And the actual cover of the book is actually a modified version of that cover. But the original cover is, you can blow that up. Um,
Oh, we're
it's
blowing it up. All right.
but it's that same illustration of all those characters below. And but over the course of time, that was the first image that I drew. And I kept adding pages, and I really had no clear structure to the story. I knew I wanted to have a, Mount Calvary scene and a few other things. And then I finally added Megaton Man and a few other characters because I already had Paul Nabisco and Gower Goose from my universe, and so it all turned into this big free for all. Because even on that cover, I made the prediction of 63 giant pages or something like that. It says so. I knew it had to be long, and then of course Bissette posted it, and it kind of went mini viral, and people were encouraging me to keep doing it. So and then I realized 2023, which is this year, is the 30th anniversary of the 1993 project, and it's the 60th anniversary of 1963. So I thought, well, I got to go ahead and finish this.
It's perfect.
So
The symmetry is wonderful. I myself am working on what is meant to be the sequel to 1963. You beat us to the punch, though, Don. You snuck this one in on us. So,
now there's an interesting story. Now I sent you that N-Man story that I did.
yes,
I don't know if you have that queued up, but
I don't.
Steve Bissette, as you know, Steve Bissette got the rights to N-Man and the Fury and Hypernaut and I think Sky Solo, the major characters, and he also got Tales of the Uncanny,
Yes,
his intellectual property. So he contacted me, and this is 2014 now. This is almost 10 years ago. He contacted me and he said, "Would you like to like to contribute to something, some of this thing?" And I don't know how we got onto N-Man. I, of course, um, had lettered N-Man, and I'd lettered the Fury, and so I was involved in the original 1963, but I had never drawn any of the characters. So I said, "Well, I'll draw." I did some samples of N-Man, and I came up with a story, and I did a 10-page story, and I penciled it and lettered it and inked it and the whole thing. And this was nearly 10 years ago, and this is for his anthology.
here it is.
And that's the cop killer cover. I don't know what that relates to, but that was a suggestion that Steve had, the unbridled N-Man. And
Beautiful.
but the next page is the story that I wrote and drew. So the Aegon of the Antediluvian. And then this girl is just a character that I kind of inadvertently created accidentally. I thought it was based on something. I never go back and read I never go back and read the old source material. So
You
I
have a
did this.
you have a very stream of consciousness style of writing comics, Don. At least in X amount of comics, especially. Is that
Sure.
is that the approach you always take? You just sort of sit down and let the story unfold on the page, or do you tend to do a quick script, or what's your process for this kind of stuff?
Uh that's a good question. It's a really good question because um in the case of X amount of comics, I just did that cover. Fuck Al, it's the 1963 annual. That was the only idea I had. And I was going on memory. I had a Cyclopster. I didn't even have a name for the character, but I made N-Man with one eye, basically. And I gave him a wrench hand, a pliers hand, and uh, I threw in a patriotic character, and I threw in a few other. They were very sketchy uh, figures, and I didn't have names for the characters. I didn't have anything. I just had this uh, notion.
All kind of analogs to characters that were created in 1963, which were in and of themselves analogs of mostly Marvel characters from that.
Right. So I mean, I can do that part of it. I can do blindfolded. So I didn't really need to go back and read the old 63 comics. And I wasn't trying to like reconstruct or predict what would have been the annual. I wasn't trying to do that. Um, but that was an idea. That was an idea. That was a suggestion back 10 years ago, 9 years ago, which is kind of what you and William Hofneck and the Giant Size 63 guys are doing, which is you're actually doing a sequel. You're using Steve's characters and then parodies of the other characters. That was kind of my idea, and which prompted me when you guys started doing 63. You guys had a head start, and that was kind of one of the things that was motivated me to do this little impromptu cover. But getting back to your improvisation
Yes.
question, which is what happens is, when I'm sitting here at the drawing board, it takes me hours to pencil, and then it takes me hours to ink, and I come up with the lettering, and then by the time I'm done with the inking, like here's a finished page that I've inked. This is the new stuff. But by the time I finish this page, then hopefully I'll have an idea for the next page. So I've done that more often than I should, because and I'm really not doing it in this case. I'm sorry, this is not making much sense, but I actually have notes and I have a script. I'm still kind of working it out as I put it down on paper and letter it. And it's kind of like Jerry Lewis used to say that you needed a script. Even if you came in to the movie set and you changed everything around, you had some kind of sudden inspiration, you needed something to fall back on. And so I tend to do that. Even when I've got a script and I work out the dialogue, I still end up throwing in some new ideas and improvising. And that's kind of the way that Megaton Man #1 happened. And it's certainly the way that X amount of comics happened last year, where I knew that these characters got together. And it's also the way that Victory Folks ended up turning out, So I start with a situation. I just trust somehow that I'm going to think of something funny or absurd that will keep it moving. And I've run into problems and created headaches for myself, but somehow generally I solve a problem and it works out.
So how would you describe Megaton Man on the spectrum? I always say Megaton. I know it should be Megaton Man, correct?
Yes.
Megaton. I always say Megaton. Just always it's just stuck in my head since I was
It's
a little.
okay.
Apologies.
Okay.
So Megaton Man. How would you describe it on the spectrum between, say, parody and satire? I mean, it's somewhat.
So those actors in the 40s used to say Tarzan.
Right.
Tarzan.
Yes.
In mid-Atlantic, oh, Tarzan has found the safari, whatever. What was your question again? We've totally forgotten it.
No.
Megaton Man is on a spectrum from what?
From between satire and parody, right? Like, I mean, there's a difference between those two things, which I vaguely understand myself, right? You're a man of letters, right, Don, so I expect a little bit more from you. But because it's not like a gag a minute strip, like say the one that this you always get compared to, I'm sure, because you were a contemporary and there's some superficial similarities to The Tick, right? And that was one where the difference to me was like The Tick was going more for like a laugh a minute, where Megaton Man seemed to be going for something, I don't know, a little bit different. What was your goal in that regard, if you had any, or was it all just?
Well, let's start. This is the reprint that Kitchen Sink did. This was literally the first page I did of Megaton Man. I had done some false starts before this. This is from the first issue. Megaton Man returns from the time turntable, and he finds himself with the Megatropolis Quartet. And, there's like asterisks that refer to last issue. And I later did a cover. And here's the this is the first page of the comic, but it's I don't know if you can see this. It says Megaton Man issue 999.
Yes.
Yeah, 12 cents. So, I was just goofing around.
Yeah.
So I have Megaton Man come back, and he ends up fighting, of course, Yarn Man says, let me read you this. This is the kind of writing. Yarn Man says, "What proof do we have that this is the real Megaton Man that we brought back from the looming past? And he could be a crummy imposter." So I did 5 pages, and that was it. I mean, I had literally no more idea for Megaton Man than he fights the Megatropolis Quartet, and it sat around. This would have been 1984, early 1984. Sat around for a few weeks, and then I thought, okay, now I need, like, what's his secret identity? Well, he's got to work at a newspaper, and then I have him. He's I don't know if you can, if this is going to focus, but he's at his typewriter, and he wears his costume under his street clothes. And I was Mike Cazala was my roommate at the time, and he didn't get that he was wearing. When the color comic book came out, he looks at it and he says, "Oh my God, he's wearing his costume under his street clothes." And I said, "Yeah, that was the whole joke." But so I was just making it up as I went along, and like I said, it takes time to draw it, and you have to wait for the ink to dry, but that doesn't take too long. But you just, and then I can just go back and fix things. If things don't match up, I can kind of redraw things. I did a lot of cutting and pasting in those days. I actually cut up pages and moved panels around and all kinds of stuff. I was just learning what I was doing. But
Let me ask you about those early days, if I could, for a second, because I remember in our previous conversations, you told me Fantagraphics took a pass on Megaton Man back in the day. So, like,
yep,
how great is it? How great does it feel that at this point they're going to put out the omnibus, and all those guys, like, not all of them, but so many of the people that they picked that they did choose to publish, like, we're never going to see their work again. Nobody's talking about them. They're certainly not coming in here for an interview. Like, how great does that feel for them to now be like, yes, Don, we want to, your work is a treasure that we want to preserve forever.
I keep wondering if I'm really talking to Gary Groth or if somebody's just spoofing me, because this is all apparently it's real, because they did a reprint of In Pictopia. I had done, of course, I did In Pictopia for Fantagraphics in '87, and Gary, there were originally they were going to have a different artist, and that fell through. And for some reason, Gary thought of me. So even though he had rejected Megaton Man, he thought it was kind of he kind of thought it was not brand ec. It was kind of silly and fanish and so forth. But he thought of me to illustrate In Pictopia, this Alan Moore script. And subsequent to that, I submitted Wendy Whitebread to a fellow named Tom Powers, who was kind of an assistant editor there at the Journal, and it sat in his files. It was like half of a comic book, 14 pages, penciled. And then one day they decided they were going to do Dirty Comics, and they thought of me, and they called me up and said, "Do you want to finish this and we'll publish it?" And then they had King Kong. So I've actually done quite a lot of work for Fantagraphics over the years. They just missed out on Megaton Man, whatever they missed
Right,
out
of
on.
course. Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, that's true. But for
But
them
we've
to
had
go back on Megaton Man specifically, which is, I mean, that's the work that's synonymous with Don Simpson. That's what, if somebody's going to talk about Don Simpson, that's your magnum opus.
well, So I don't know. Gary's come to his senses, or he's gone insane. I don't know which one, but yeah, they're in whole hog, and right now, hopefully they'll break even on it.
That's so great.
Um, it's a vindication. It's a validation. I'm pleased. I don't think I'm going to be getting a uh, Hernandez Brothers box set because I just don't have that much work. But no, it's prestigious. It's
Hey man, an
nice.
omnibus is beautiful. That's the way. I think that's the way that a lot of the stuff from the past will be preserved the longest, just because trade paperbacks have become as collectible, go out of print, especially in long runs and multiple volumes. Like try to find the early volumes of this or that. So
Mhm.
the omnibus version is the stuff that like the cream of the crop that we know people want the entirety of, and we'll bring out. And I love seeing that. For
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I hope it. I know they've done a great job with X amount of comics. They even stuck with my title, my confusing title.
well,
So I can't complain.
but that book, that title itself ties into multiple things, right? I mean, it ties into, besides 1963 and the final annual, which it only loosely does, it's really a sequel to In Pictopia, and also sort of some of the unpublished. Tell us about Byron Starkweather, Don. Tell me who Byron
Well,
Starkweather.
after In Pictopia, there was a series called Anything Goes, which was a fundraising project for Fantagraphics because they had to defray their legal costs. Because Michael Fleischer was suing them. Michael Fleischer was suing them because in an interview with Harlan Ellison in the pages of the Comics Journal, Harlan Ellison said that Michael Fleischer's work on Jonah Hex was bug fuck, which for Harlan was a term of high admiration.
Yeah, okay.
He was insane. He's weird. It's uncomfortable. It's
But in a good way.
disturbed. And apparently, Michael Fleischer, who was bug fucked, or he really took offense at this and claimed that it had hurt his career and so forth. I only read one Conan magazine story that he did, and he is pretty sick. I never read Jonah Hex, but in any case, there was this lawsuit, and apparently a lot of people that hated the Comics Journal testified against, on behalf of Michael Fleischer, including Jim Shooter. And so they had a lot of legal bills, and they had insurance that covered part of it, but they still needed to defray some costs. So they put out this series called Anything Goes, and they got Jack Kirby, and they got Frank Miller, and they got anybody they could get to contribute. The Hernandez brothers, all these people did contributions, Dave Sim and so forth. And they had this script from Alan Moore. I don't know how they got a hold of it, but Alan did something for them. And so then I ended up illustrating in Pictopia. And then they had a follow-up. Alan had written this thing called Convention Tension, which was kind of a companion piece. And I think I might have sent you the PDF because I still have the plot.
You did.
It was going to be a multi-issue series. Back in those days, we did not have graphic novels as such, except for Will Eisner. But it was going to be a multi-part story, and it was kind of the companion piece in Pictopia, which was it took place at um, a comic book convention. It's like the comic book convention on the edge of forever. It's this hotel, and there's all these weird types. There's like a Stan Lee type and a Jack Kirby type, and they haven't spoken for years. And there's a crazy fan who gets stuck in an elevator the whole convention. He can never get off on the right floor, but he starts building these continuities of the people that he keeps seeing on the elevator. So, and it's pure Alan Moore at his satirical best. And one of the characters is a character named Byron Starkwinter, who's clearly a Steve Gerber.
Stark Winter. Yes. Sorry.
Starkwinter. I'm sorry. I'm misquoting my own. And Byron Starkwinter is a Steve Gerber kind of mediocre hack who takes a lot of drugs and he creates Mookie the Worm, which is clearly Howard the Duck. And he goes crazy and he's at this convention and I always thought of this as kind of a Alan was contemplating fan adulation. Byron Starkwinter, it's not his real name. He's got some, it's Howard something. Byron goes crazy because first of all, he's chemically dependent on these hallucinogens, but also the fan adulation. He can't handle it. And it drives him crazy. And he starts believing that Mookie the Worm is real and et cetera, et cetera. And the whole thing spirals out of control. And when I created Paul Nabisco, who's a character in Bizarre Heroes, he's a writer who creates Donald Goose. Well, it was a combination of it was me doing an avatar of Byron Starkwinter and Steve Gerber and Howard the Duck. It was all rolled into one.
Ah, I see. Okay.
And so Paul Nabisco was always kind of an Alan Moore satire, but it was Alan Moore if he had gone crazy, if he had gone the Byron Starkwinter route. Little did I know that history. That's exactly what Alan Moore would do. Is he would go the Byron Starkwinter route, and it would all go to his head, and or it would just whatever. It just he couldn't handle it. And that's what made it so surprising to me that he has become what he's become, because he seemed to be hip to it. He seemed to know that there were pitfalls and landmines, and he seemed to know not to take this stuff too seriously back in the 80s. So I'm not sure what happened. I've heard various theories and stories about what he might have ingested. I don't know, but it just seems like it seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I mean, is it one of those cautionary tales about the price of fame and taking?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what it is.
Taking yourself maybe a little too seriously.
And you'd think I would have thought that he was kind of insulated from that because he had actually made fun of it himself. So it's really sad, but in any case, that's the reference to Byron Starkwinter, and nobody knows what this is except me,
and me.
I'm the only one. Well, I can't now. I'm sending the PDF around. It's circulating. It's got a life of its own now. There's several scholars that have the original Infictopia script and the convention tension plot outline.
Would it be okay if somebody asked me if someone were to reach out to me, could I pass it on to them? I didn't want to do that unless you told me it was okay.
Just don't tell anybody where you got it. Is anybody watching this video? Yeah.
8 people, Don. 8 people, okay. But we can take care of them.
Well, all right, yeah. No, I didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement, so I don't care. But yeah, that's the reference to Byron Starkwinter and Paul Nabisco.
And I'm right that these references are in X amount of comics, right? So it's like we're talking deep. It's tough to understand what's going on in this comic if you don't know multiple layers of the lore here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Now I wrote at Gary's suggestion, I wrote a annotation in the back. So there's about 6 pages of just describing who these characters are.
Great.
And I I explain who Edward Albee is. I explain who J.K. Rowling is. I explain who, just every kind of, it's kind of a parody of if you've ever read any book published by Library of America will have annotations. It'll have notes in the back. So you're reading Mark Twain or you're reading John Dos Passos, and in the back they explain what the Great Depression was, and they explain who the radio personalities are who are mentioned in the story. So I do all that in the back of this X amount
Huh.
of comics paperback with the beautiful aqua cover. There's a list of characters in the back, and I explained who my characters are, and I explained who I did not explain. I forgot to explain who Byron Starkwinder
Okay,
was,
that's gonna be this is
but
critical information then for the viewing public.
everything else I explain. I explain what Jesus Christ Superstar is. I explain what Supertramp was, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I,
Don't you think
I,
you mentioned J.K. Rowling? Don't don't you think it's and did you know? I don't know if you read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where Moore made Harry Potter into the Antichrist, and I just thought it was so ironic since he has morphed into a literal Voldemort of sorts himself as he who will not be named. Like you can't name him in Pictopia, you can't name him in the movies or anything. I found that
I didn't know that, but that makes sense. I've always felt that he's kind of he has a certain resentment. I think my own theory, and I don't know, but I think he has a little bit of a resentment toward Neil Gaiman and J.K. Rowling and Clive Barker because they've had the career that he should have had in prose. I think. Um, we probably shouldn't be talking about Alan. We talked about him
yeah,
enough, but
yeah.
I just think it's got to eat. It's got to eat away at him because he had, you know, he certainly has the talent and the imagination. And I look at Neil Gaiman's career in particular, but even J.K. Rowling, who's even a little more watered down. They're doing what Alan Moore could have done blindfolded.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Uh,
They are doing like a lighter, Alan Moore light kind of in a lot of
yeah.
ways.
So I mean, it's gotta hurt a little bit. It's kind of like the Tick for
Yeah, no,
me
I
and
didn't. I
me
hope
and the
that
Tick.
wasn't a sore spot for me to bring it up because I'm just
No, no, I don't care.
there's obvious similarities between the two, but critical differences as well. I think that your level of craft is a level or two above what Edlin was putting out at the time, and I love Ben Edlund's stuff. Although I found his stuff to be just more like funny to 13-year-old Danny. It was like fall down funny kind of
No,
parent.
no, it's funny. I've seen a few. I've never. I remember Lance Falk was a fellow that worked at Hanna-Barbera back in the. I lived out in California for literally just a few months, and Lance Falk took me out to the comic book store and showed me this Tick thing. He said, "Look at this." He said, "Isn't this hysterical?" And I was totally into Border Worlds at that point. That was kind of like my attitude was, if this is what the public wants, it was kind of like the Monkees opposed to the Beatles.
Yeah, no, totally.
Incredibly pretentious of me to say that, but that was always what I thought. It's like if that's all they want from Megaton Man, they can just have the Tick. I don't care.
Got it.
And of course, I've regretted it since then, but no, it was funny. It's done its thing. I did a Tick Megaton Man team up for War of the Independence. So it's all water under the bridge. Um, what else was I going to say about that?
You tell me, Don.
No, I don't remember.
I know. We also, I have the must-have Don Simpson must talk about checklist over here, Don. That's like
Okay,
underlined in red.
what's next on the list?
Just kidding. You wanted to talk about
Well,
something called? Well, actually, I have one on the Dan Shaheen. Very curious to talk about. And we just broached the subject of J.K.
I
Rowling.
know what I wanted to say. I wanted to say,
Yes.
on the subject of the Tick, I just sent you a scan. I don't know if you have it queued up, but I sent you a scan. Dave Garcia who did PandaCon
Oh
and
yeah.
Monica's shop. They did a nice scan of a piece of artwork I did in 1989. It was a Tyranno Man PandaCon
Uh-huh.
pinup. Dave Garcia was one of the inkers on the Tick when it was going great guns later on, and I used to talk to him on the phone, and he was like, he goes, "Oh, Don," he goes, "Man, these guys, we're just ripping you off, man." God love Dave. He was inking the Tick, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, they're just ripping you off, man." And I was like, what can I do?
This is kind of what I'm trying to say, Don, is like there was a level of craft in Megaton Man that I don't think young Danny was equipped to appreciate at the time. And for me,
Right.
it was about the gags and stuff. But as I've grown older and grown to appreciate it, like when I look at your impeccable line work, I mean, dude, you don't cross hatch, you don't speckle, you don't anything. It's so smooth. I just don't. As a non-artist, it's like a magic trick every time I see somebody draw a picture. So it's a miracle.
Well,
But your stuff,
I,
it shows such a level of control and mastery of the medium. It's impressive.
well, thank you for the kind words. Um, I kind of think of it as doing things the hard way because I'm just, like the title X amount of comics, the 1963 WhenElse annual, just overdoing it, overthinking it. I was always trying to, not just make fun of Megaton. Megaton Man was, in the Megatropolis Quartet. Clearly, that was Megaton Man meets or that was Superman meets the Fantastic Four. But I didn't want to just stop there, so I got into all kinds of, subplots about, the see-through girl gets pregnant and they have a child, and the child is now in this is Simon, you know. But again, I'm making this up as I go along. Megaton Man and the see-through girl, they hook up, and here it is back in where are we? Back in 1985. Here's the cover of Megaton Man #4, if I can find it. And this was speaking of Alan. Here's Megaton Man and the see-through
Oh,
girl.
that's classic.
Does this look familiar to you?
That's Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre.
Because when I met Alan in 1985, he said, ripping off Megaton Man. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm doing a nuclear character. He's called Dr. Manhattan. He explained the whole thing. And sure enough, he clearly down to look at these buildings with the crossword puzzle backgrounds.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear that he was looking at Megaton Man.
Okay,
But
speaking
he was kind of seizing on the darker aspects of, there was always a little more complication to my parody.
yes. Yeah,
I
totally.
was always going for something a little darker. In fact, I just heard from somebody online who's been doing reaction videos to my comics. He kind of got triggered by some disturbing element in my comics. I'm not going to go into what they are. You'll have to figure it out yourself. But I've always just gone into darker areas, even though it's funny. I go into sexual areas. I go into psychological areas, and it's mostly just it doesn't pay off commercially. It just ends up making it more obtuse.
Okay,
But
speaking of influence, though, Don, did Butch Hartman rip off Megaton Man with his Crimson Chin character on the Fairly Odd Parents?
looks to me like what I've seen. It looks reminiscent, but by now it's like everybody's doing it. Even the Marvel characters have the physique of Megaton Man. It used to be
Totally. Yeah.
Hit. What was the other thing? Hit, and there was a bunch of them. Now even Venom looks like Megaton Man.
Yeah, well, speaking of the Pit and other Image characters, those were characters that like were expected. I mean, the 1963 sequel was supposed to be. Now they went from 63 into 93, and we were going to see the flip side of the coin. It really was like this a superhero version of In Pictopia is how I sort of imagined it to be, because I couldn't imagine that Alan would have had a lot of great things to say about the then current superhero scene.
Well, and I did send you the complete PDF of what they're going to publish. I think I might have. But I wrote,
I don't
I mentioned the text. There's a 6 pages of just explaining who the characters are and what all the
Yes,
obscure
yes,
references
yes.
are, like it's a Woody Allen movie or something. But there's also a long piece. There's 8,000 words that I wrote, which is all
Oh,
about.
great.
It's all about my involvement with the original 63, how I came to letter it, how
Oh, excellent.
uh, I worked with, how I got fired by Rick Veitch, how I worked with Steve, Jim Valentino, the whole thing, the Image panel, 1992, all of that. And then I go into a kind of theorization about what we might have had if we had the annual, because not only would we have a wrap up of 1963 as a universe, kind of a send off and a launch, and Bissette, Veitch and Bissette wanted to do more. They were Rick. I joke about this, but Rick Veitch was actually. I say that he was looking for office space for the world headquarters. He was going to start his own imprint, the whole thing. They really had high expectations, and then of course it never happened. Um, but what would have happened? You would have had a coherent 1963 universe, but you would have had a coherent Image universe.
Yeah.
Now think about this, Dan. I mean, they never really did anything other than a few team ups, and then Youngblood flew off into outer space, and Wildcats flew off into outer space. Imagine what Alan Moore would have done, taking just in the course of having a team up crossover with the 63 characters. He could have done this blindfolded. You would have had Youngblood, you would have had you know uh, Shadowhawk, you would have had the Savage Dragon, all tied in to an Alan Moore concept of what their world was like. I mean, think about that for a moment. He could have done it with one arm tied behind his back, and that never happened.
Yeah.
And what did happen was you've had a few team ups, a few crossovers. Spawn appears in whatever.
And
Then
this,
everything flew off into outer space. And instead of a Image universe series of movies, you have a Marvel universe and a DC universe, but no Image universe. That's my point. Now just think about that. Let that sink in for a minute. If Alan Moore had been allowed, or if he had gone ahead and done this annual, it would have been a real Image universe. So we don't have it. Right?
yeah, which I think, it's the creator owned nature of Image too, like, doesn't make me say that we necessarily missed out on something huge that way, but I do say we missed out. I would have liked to have read that book, because I know it just would have been a skewering
A
of.
lot of people would like to have read that. That's a lot of people today would still read that book.
Yeah, did the script ever get produced? That's the detail that I'm fuzzy on. And Jim
I've
Lee
heard
never
conflicting
delivered.
things. Jim Valentino says there's a plot. I've never seen it. I was not privy to it. I was out of it before that was a thing.
Because Jim Lee loves money as much as anybody. So my guess is that, like, it was so insulting to the Image creators in some way, or their creations or whatever, that they're just like, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time writing this thing that's just an insult to my craft. That's my opinion on what could have happened.
Yeah, well, that would work. I don't know. I don't know. I think it would have been a little bit of biting the hand that feeds him. I think it was Jim Lee just saying, what do I need? What do I need to be doing this to the benefit of Veitch and Bissette, I could just get Elmore to write stuff for me. That seems to be the more direct explanation.
Ah, right.
Um,
Which is what happened for
which is
sure.
what happened. So I don't know. And he was going through his own burnout. Like I say in the book, in my text piece, I was at the image panel, and I actually hold on, my phone is
Uh-oh.
alarm is going off.
Oh, by the way, Image Comics just recently, for you comic loving folks out there, just announced they were ending their exclusive relationship with Diamond Comic Distributors and are going over to the competition, Lunar Distribution, who is also like DCBS, Discount Comic Book Service. They're the #1 like competitor to comic book shops around the country. So like
Okay.
basically now get a piece of every DC comic and Image comic that's going to come out
Yeah.
in the direct market. Kind of a bummer. Eric Stevenson promised years ago that would be a bad idea, and now he's gone and done it. Do you know Eric? And what can you tell? He's the one publisher out there who's he's elusive. He will not come on to comic book news. I'm not sure what he has to hide. Don, what do you think?
Well, I told you, I was out in Berkeley. This is almost 10 years ago. I ran into Eric in the grocery store. I was just visiting, doing sightseeing around the Berkeley campus. And I stopped in a grocery store and I ran into Eric. I wasn't even looking up Image in those days, but I don't know. I don't know what I don't know that print is even worth
Uh,
doing. We'll see. I will know a little more by the end of this year if it's
wow.
worth doing or not. But
Well, they've decided that it's not worth doing for their catalog. They've gone digital only for their catalog going forward too. So
you mean Diamond?
no Image. So
Okay.
the days of the printed comic,
Yeah.
I just feel like comics were the one thing that had an edge over all the other printed media, and why it has not suffered as much, and in fact has even sort of like thrived, because now with the whole art book approach, giant size hardcovers and expensive printing processes and whatnot, it's become a premium luxury item. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Heidelberger Druck, Don.
What's
The
that? Oh,
the Heidelberger Druck. You're not familiar with the Heidelberger Druck?
no.
With its auto grifting and fan bilking options, this printer can be used to exploit hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your fan base. Although you might think that's a bad idea.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is this like a Gaslight era printing press? What
Yeah.
I'm doing here, I'm actually working. I don't know if you can see this very clearly. This is blue pencil.
Yeah. It shows up.
Here's Preston Percy and Clarissa. And here's Preston Percy. And this is Clarissa's alternate clone. She's from X amount of comics. And here's Cosmic Cat. And I'm just working at this while we talk. But no, I don't know. I actually, as I say in the book, when I was on the Image panel in '92, these guys had just come off the Image tent at Chicago, and they had a big Image panel in San Diego. And Valentino calls me over. I wasn't on the dais. There was everybody was up on the stage. It was the uh, biggest panel I'd ever seen. I mean, the thousands of people in the audience. So Valentine calls me over. He says, go get Veitch and Bissette, because he wanted to announce 1963. And so I run down to the dealer's room and I find Veitch and Bissette and I bring them upstairs and they get Alan on the phone. And I wasn't privy to this conversation. Um, I guess my payoff for running this errand was to letter the book. But anyway, so they announced this thing, and it's like, oh my God, Alan Moore's big return to comics. And then there's going to be 6 issues, and then there's going to be a team up annual crossover. And Jim Lee is at the other end of the dais, and he says, "I'm going to pencil it." And I remember the expression on Valentino's face, not to mention Veitch and Bissette, who were like, they had no idea that, it was kind of like, well, we'll talk about this later. But my impression at the time, and this might be retrospective, but I just don't think anybody believed for a minute that Jim Lee was actually going to draw it because all his books were late. He was already late on like 5 titles or something. So that was my little anecdote for that. I just don't think Jim Lee. I don't know that Jim Lee. Very well, he could have been offended by the implications of the story. I think that's
It would have been perfect to switch from the retro old school style into the image style. It could have been, if it was pulled off correctly, could have been great. I can't think of why Jim Lee wouldn't want to do it other than his fan, or just it was insulting.
Well, the other reason would be that the numbers were just not. It was this weird.
Yeah, that's true.
It was this weird satire throwback.
Yes.
It was on newsprint. People didn't get it. It was a really low selling image book.
I bought it off the shelf every issue. I look forward to it so much.
Meanwhile, Todd was getting Alan to write Spawn, and Jim Valentino was getting Alan to write Shadowhawk, and those were selling really well. So Jim Lee thought, I guess I'll just get Alan to write ABC or whatever the heck it was.
Yeah, the Wildstorm, and get in the Wildstorm, and then drag him back to DC, which he must have not appreciated very much either.
It's all a legend now.
Yeah,
it's all the stuff of history.
Well, speaking of legends, Don, you're a bit of one yourself. I described you as Indy heartthrob Don Simpson in the description for this video, and Eric Reynolds chuckled at that. And I'll say this, Eric, if you're watching now, I wouldn't mind a copy of X amount of comics hardcover, and I could review it live on the $1 Million Comics Cam. Just saying, okay? Just saying. Don, I really want to thank you for coming in. Is there anything else you want to talk about or promote before we get out of here? Unfortunately, I got a day job I got to get back to, and you've got
No, it's been fun talking to you. I think you're all apprised of what I'm doing. I'm posting this new stuff on Facebook, so follow me on Facebook. You will see these pages on Facebook, and hopefully they will see print in next year when I have enough of these to go to press. And I will use that printing press that Dan showed you.
And Don, you never answered me, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Would you be willing to do some kind of pinup to appear in the 1963 annual? I know it's a bunch of amateurs, but we'd be happy to pay you. You're a respected pro.
Oh, you got some very talented guys working on it, no doubt. It's a great project. I might be able to do one. You have to. I don't know if you know what my rates are.
Oh, I don't.
We'll have to talk money.
Yeah. Okay.
Get back to your day job, and we'll talk. We'll talk money.
Cool. Does that include owning the original?
Well, yeah, I can. Look it up.
All right, we'll talk about it. We will talk about it.
All right.
Don.
All right, Dan.
I want to thank you so
much. So long from Pittsburgh.
My hometown.
We miss you.
That I don't remember and I've never been to, but thank you so much, Don. Really appreciate it. Keep putting out great comics, and keep in touch. Anytime you got something to promote or want to talk about, like Don has a strong opinion about X, come to me. I'd love to talk it over with my literally dozens of viewers. Literally, Don.
Get back to Steve Jeppy, whatever his messages are.
I'm working on him soon. Okay, thanks again, Don.
All right, thanks, Dan.
I gotta do my closing talk here. Thanks, Don. Guys, thank you for checking this thing out. Man, we maintained an audience throughout this entire thing, watching and enjoying it. It's easy when you got somebody as knowledgeable and articulate as Dr. Dandy Don Simpson. So I want to thank him again for showing up. Next week, who are we going to have? Tom Scioli. Oh, he's going to come in, and we're just going to talk about Stan Lee. Like we're gonna talk about his book about Stan Lee, but we're just gonna talk about Stan the man, if you will, right? We're gonna talk about like who this guy really was, and I think you people out there who watch the show regularly might know this about me. Like, I'm not a Stan hero worshiper, and I'm not a Stan hater. He's just a man, and we'll have a lot to talk about. He's a complex guy who literally helped shape pop culture in his own image. Pretty wild legacy to have. So we'll bring him in here. We'll bring in Tom Scioli. We'll talk about that, and then we'll have other guests coming soon. Jim Rugg's coming back to the show. Rick Veitch is coming back to the show. Who knows? Maybe even Steve Jeppy will come back to the show. We'll see. And you will see if you tune in next time.
See what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them. Suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
Hey, Teacup, why don't you chill out?